It's Monday, friends. That means it's time for a Q&A. So for those of you just joining us, the rules are very simple. All you have to do is leave your questions down below, and hopefully they'll be answered on next week's show. And we're going to start this week off with a question from Reclaimer, who says, Q&A, would you personally like to see Halo 5's Warzone return in Halo Infinite? I actually really liked Warzone for what it was, despite many people hating it, and would like to know what you think about it. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, that's much better. So Warzone, let's talk about it. I'm not a fan of Warzone. I think that its heart was in the right place, but I think it broke a lot of Halo rules and ends up feeling kind of like a sloppy fan mod more than a proper, like, AAA production. And let me explain why. I think they looked at Halo 4 and they thought people don't like the loadout system. They want even starts. Big Team Battle, though, seemed to be pretty popular. What if we took Big Team Battle, expanded it, threw in AI, and used the Halo 4 loadout system, but slightly tweaked? And then we'll just use the Arena 4v4 for the even starts that people like. And I think, like, okay, I can see how they'd arrive at that point. But in this mode, the problem with loadouts in Halo, it's not that it is copying Call of Duty and that's the only problem. It's that foundationally does not work within Halo systems. What makes Halo really good is that it's a very proactive game. Players need to constantly explore every nook and cranny in a multiplayer map for weapons and equipment that they want to use. By giving players the ability to just have whatever they'd like, they have no reason to explore the map. The maps become very linear. Players kind of go up to their kill points, hang out there with the weapon that they like, and rack up the kills. It kind of stagnates player mobility around a map. Now, the way that 343 tried to kind of encourage player movement is the bases that you need to capture, but also the AI system. They had like Covenant patrols, Promethean patrols running around, and that's actually a cool idea. The problem, though, is that these AI systems do not function like the campaign AI systems. The rules have changed. The AI will react very differently from how the campaign teaches you that they should react. Vehicles can't be hijacked now for some reason. Some AI just simply don't respond to certain types of weaponry in the way that they should, like plasma weapons. They have health bars with weird Destiny names, and they're very bullet spongy, and it's like, but I thought, what about 30 seconds of fun? What's going on? You know, the AI are very weird in Warzone. And so you're kind of like breaking Halo combat rules for the sake of artificial difficulty. And it's just, overall, Warzone is a very sloppy game mode. And I hope that we don't see it again. I think it was an interesting lesson in what makes a fun Halo game mode, but I don't think conceptually it's the direction Halo needs to go in. I think Big Team Battle is closer to what Halo is at a large scale. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't things that we could take from Warzone. The AI system I do think is very interesting, but I do think it needs to be done more like the campaign. You know, you can't have this, look guys, we're Destiny. Our AI have health bars and fun, wacky fantasy names. You can't really do that. You know, they need to respond like how the player expects them to respond. We need to be able to assassinate all of them. We need to hijack their vehicles. And if it does get to a point where there's way too many players on the map, the AI just simply can't fight them off, maybe AI just aren't compatible with this game mode. You know, instead of breaking them to get them to work in the mode, just maybe don't include them. They don't need to be there. That is mostly my primary issue with Warzone. It's not that Warzone exists, it's more so that Warzone is a Halo game mode that ran into issues, and its solution to these issues was break core aspects of Halo's combat loop, such as the way that the player engages with AI. That's not a sign of strength if you're willing to break some of your own rules. You know, that's a sign that maybe this isn't working and it needs to be thought out a little bit better. But that's just how I feel. I don't want to invalidate people who do actually like Warzone. So our next question comes from Flirat, I hope I said that right, who says, Q&A, how would you handle Sprint in Infinite, given that it's already confirmed? Will it be a campaign-only feature or perhaps a game mode without it? So, I am expecting Sprint to be in both the multiplayer and the campaign, and the reason why isn't because I like Sprint. I'm more in the camp that Sprint harms Halo's sandbox more than it assists Halo's sandbox. But I understand that most modern games, Sprint is an expected feature. I don't think that's necessarily a go-ahead for developers to just include it regardless of if it fits organically into the combat loop. You know, I don't think you should just have a feature 'cause modern day, 'cause 2020, why doesn't it have sprint? So I'm actually personally a fan of finite sprint systems, which are surprising. Most modern games now have moved on to just infinite sprint as a base trait. I like when sprint was finite in modern shooters because I think at a certain point, is this really adding anything? So finite sprint is kind of interesting because there are genuine options there and consequences to the choices you make. If you want to sprint, you have to do so knowing that you're going to be draining your stamina bar, and when the sprint is done, you won't be able to use it for a little while. With infinite sprint, you can just do whatever you want. You know, it's always there. There's no consequence to the choice. So I think that it's just less interesting, and I think it kind of promotes unhealthy player behavior. And it kind of speeds players up, like they want faster, faster, faster. Sprint is now infinite, but it needs to be more. And we see Modern Warfare, which kind of came up with a hilarious solution to that problem, which is double sprint. So you have the base sprint, which is infinite, and then you have an even faster double sprint, which is not infinite. And it's just like, oh my god, are we gonna get to the point where double sprint needs to be infinite, and we're gonna have a triple sprint? You know, it's silly. At a certain point, we need to draw the line and say, maybe finite sprint was interesting. We'll just up base movement speed for players if they really do think they're moving too slow. The topic of sprint in the Halo community is always ongoing, and I have really no solutions to it. I just don't like sprint because I think it kind of makes the combat loop a little bit clunky, because in the classic Halo games, it was seamless. The line between movement and engagement, there was no barrier between it, and now there is a barrier. You're either moving or you're shooting. And in order to both move and shoot, you have to do these complicated button it's like, things are getting a little bit messy. I wish it was a little bit more streamlined, kind of like the classic games, but, you know, that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't really have a solution to it, and I know that some people do like sprint, some people don't like sprint, and it's just, the conversation should continue because I do think that there is a solution. We just haven't found it yet. We have to keep talking. So this is actually a fun question. This comes from Isaac Sanchez, who says, Q&A. If it was to return in Infinite, or even another spin-off game down the line, how would you do dual wielding in a way that would make it viable in campaign and multiplayer? Personally, I'd allow you to switch weapons and melee without dropping a gun, but still limit grenade use. Or would you even want it to return in the first place? So, dual wielding, I think is really cool. I think it is very fiddly, and kinda awkwardly implemented in the Bungie games, but I don't think the idea is bad, because obviously gameplay is important, but I do think visual presentation is something that's really important in Halo. The game needs to look really cool in motion, and I do think dual wielding kind of adds to that. It's kind of neat seeing somebody holding two submachine guns and just going off on a player. The way that I'd probably handle dual wielding is very similar to how the Call of Duty franchise did it, where weapons just are two weapons, if that makes any sense. Like, if you find a weapon that, like an SMG or something, and you pick it up, you just got two SMGs now. That's the weapon, it's two of them. If Halo Infinite does have aiming down the sights, then for dual-wielded weapons, you can't access aiming down the sights. They're always hip-firing. Grenade maybe could be a more interesting topic down below, if grenades should be included there, but I think the visual presentation of dual wielding is something very strong, something that Halo can revisit, even if the mechanical implementation of the Bungie games is a little bit strange. That being said, we could even revisit the way that Bungie approached dual wielding, kind of fix a little things that maybe didn't work, maybe approach them in very different ways, because A big strength of dual wielding is that it encourages the player to interact with the sandbox a little bit more. You're encouraged to kind of mix and match and find the perfect combination. For Halo 2, it was the Magnum and the plasma pistol. Some people, though, didn't like that, and they preferred just the visceral awesomeness of dual wielding two needlers. It wasn't practical, but it looked so cool, you know? It is cool that a system like that did encourage the player to kind of express themselves in these different ways, and it's something Halo has been missing a little bit lately, but I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts. So this is actually another fun question. This comes from Will Kelly, who says, Q&A, did you hear the new recreation of Walk in the Woods they made for Infinite? What did you think? More broadly, thoughts on Infinite's music so far? So, I did hear the Walk in the Woods remake, and I love it to death, and I can clarify that, because it's very different sounding from Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. The two of them, the combination of them, they really liked kind of like rocky sounding music. You've kind of got these slow 70s/80s style rock drums, and sometimes there's like a bass line, sometimes there's strings, sometimes it's just a choir playing over drum beats during combat encounters, and they're usually very simplistic. They're not too crazy, not too overproduced, and that's by design. And what I think is kind of interesting about this new rendition of Walk in the Woods is that it kind of does the same thing. Obviously, there still is a lot of modern flair, there's a lot more synthesizers and kind of electronic-y stuff, but there is still a little bit of an organic, just simplicity to it. The choir, what I thought was kind of interesting is the choir wasn't just going full out, like almost hollering, kind of like a lot of modern movie and game choirs where they're almost yelling and you're kind of wincing. The choir was singing very softly in that, as well as the drum beat. It was being played very just softly, and I think that was kind of interesting, that level of care was noticed. They thought, okay, this isn't going to be a big bombastic thing. We've got to approach this very delicately, very softly, and most importantly, whimsically. That's something that I thought was really fun. Halo 5's soundtrack was very serious. Same with Halo 4's soundtrack, very serious. Most of the songs in it were not having any fun here. This was a serious track that you were listening to. And what I thought was kind of interesting about Walk in the Woods is it was fun. It was very jovial. It was very just like bouncy and happy and fun sounding. And that's something we don't hear a lot in modern Halo. I think back to 2017, I met Marty O'Donnell in person. And something interesting that he brought up was Peril in Halo 2 was deliberately designed as a kind of bouncy, fun, almost goofy track because you just fought through the Flood as the Arbiter, and they were very serious, very scary levels. And so now it's time to unwind a little bit. We're gonna play something fun and wacky. And it's like, if that's a sign of where Infinite's musical direction is gonna go, that we're gonna have our serious tracks, but sometimes it's okay to have fun when you're shooting up the Banished. That makes me excited. I'm really energized. Yes, so the Walk in the Woods rendition, I'm like, yes, please, more. I like where this is going. So the next question comes from Luke Lyons, who says, Q&A, what are your thoughts on the T rating of Infinite and its impact on the game? Personally, I think the bad, generic sound design that the guns have are affected by this, along with the amount of blood splatter on the ground. This bothers me quite a lot, and it's quite immersion breaking. I hope they find a solid workaround. So, I have a couple of thoughts on this. The sound design of Infinite, I didn't actually think it was bad. I thought the game sounded very solid. My problem with it is that it sounded exactly how I was expecting it to sound. When he started firing the assault rifle, I was like, yeah, that's how a machine gun in a video game sounds. When he picked up that commando rifle thing, I was like, yep, that's how that gun probably sounds. There wasn't a lot of impact. It was very just kind of safe sounding. And Bungie games are very musical. That's the best way I can describe their sound design. In Halo 4 and 5, I think a problem that 343 had was kind of the way that you balance out a gunshot. So I think of like the DMR in Halo 5. It's a very loud and kind of ear-piercing sound where it's just a sudden, compressed crunch sound. And when you're rapidly squeezing the trigger and you're hearing that crunch, 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 crunch over and over again, it starts to drive you crazy. And with the Bungie games, they had a lot of focus on kind of, if you open up these gunshots in any kind of like audio software, you can see that there is a build-up and then a long tail end to the gunshot. It's not just one sudden compressed sound all at once. And that kind of sound design philosophy carried on into Destiny. A lot of Destiny's weapons are very easy on the ears. They're very musical sounding. Now, what's kind of interesting about the Bungie sound design in Halo is Bungie made heavy use of stock sound effects. The Halo 3 assault rifle, that's a stock sound effect for a Browning that was sped up. The shotgun, that's a stock sound effect for a SPAS 12. The shield recharge is a stock sound effect called low frequency modulation. Yeah, the Halo shield recharge, that's a stock sound effect Bungie used. Bungie used a lot of like very soft, very safe sounding stock sound effects, but I think that this is unintentional. I think the kind of simplicity of a lot of stock sound effects are why those Bungie games had charm. With 343, they're actually properly treating each individual sound effect as its own production. And I think sometimes they get lost in kind of the intricacies and the details. Sometimes just a standard pew-pew for a plasma pistol, that's good enough, you know? In Halo 5, the plasma pistol has this weird, crackly energy sound. It's very, very detailed, but when a little grunt is holding a laser pistol at you, I'm kind of expecting a pew-pew to come out of that, like the Bungie games, not this weird kind of crackling and crunching in Halo 5. So no, I don't think the teen rating is affecting the way the sounds are. Destiny is a teen-rated game, and sound design is excellent in that game. On the topic of violence, though, that is where we could make more of an argument. So, a lot of people do say that Halo was always a teen-rated game and only the Flood were the violent part of the series, and I don't actually agree there, because Combat Evolved was comically messy at points. Like, picture a group of Covenant in the halls of the Pillar of Autumn, and just unload your assault rifle on them. By the time you're done firing, the walls, the floor, the ceiling are just covered in alien blood. And the same, though, goes for the Marines. I think of kind of when you're following that one Marine to the bridge of the Pillar of Autumn, and you're walking past all the wounded Marines, there was a lot of blood in that environment. The only reason it doesn't kind of make us sick is because it's, you know, early 2000s blood. It clearly looked like a video game. Halo was always a pretty violent game. Marines sprayed so much blood when you meleeed them, you know? I don't agree that Halo was always a teen rating, but I do also think sometimes the community gets too fixated on things, like when blood decals fall on the floor. So a decal is kind of like a flat, transparent thing. Like when you shoot into a wall and there's kind of that picture of a bullet hole that's been painted on the wall, that's called a decal. When you shoot at a guy and blood drips on the floor and it's kind of like clearly a flat picture of blood that's now been pasted on it, that's a decal as well. And decals, when there are multiple of them stacked on top of each other, it can get actually performance intensive. So I'd imagine some of the bloodlessness of Halo 5 is more so due to like a kind of fear of performance dipping. It's more of like an over-optimization thing. Like, no, we can't have too many blood decals on the ground or the player's gonna see all of them and then the frame rate's gonna tank because the engine's prioritizing too many different things at once. I think that's more of what was going on there. But I also think some of it is just like an artistic direction. You know, 343 tries to approach things very plausibly, almost to a fault, where some things look a little bit too realistic, where I think a bit of stylization and exaggeration would help. I think of kind of the problem with a lot of the modern brutes. They look very plausible as a space alien. They look very realistic. And then you look at Halo 3 brutes, and they've kind of got these exaggerated, cartoonish proportions. They've got teeth so large they can't even close their mouths. They always have a frown. And so I think with the blood, it's very similar there. 343 is trying to think, okay, well, if you impact an alien, this amount of blood is probably going to fall to the ground. You know, it's not going to be like in Halo 3 where you melee a Marine and like just a gallon of blood bursts out of his head and the Marine's still like walking around fine. You know, they try to treat it more realistically, and sometimes I think It's okay, you know, amp up the cartoonishness. When we shoot an alien with a gun, we want to see just their back open up and blue blood spray everywhere, regardless if it's realistic or not. It just looks cool. I think it's a hybrid of multiple things. I think it's deliberate choices, also a bit of, you know, not wanting the teen rating to be kind of stressed to a certain point, but mostly I lean into the camp that I do just think it's artistic and creative choices, if that makes any sense. So the final question comes from Dread is Dead, who says, Q&A. First, thank you for using Halo 4 music. The Halo community is forgetting Halo 4 every day, and this includes the good parts. What are things you think Halo 4 could bring into Halo Infinite, be it music, gameplay, or overall aesthetic, etc.? So Halo 4, I do think surprisingly has some positives that maybe were not good in their execution, but good conceptually. Halo 4, in this interesting kind of way, was early on in what the next big fad would be. So Firefight. That was kind of a creation of that era. During the Xbox 360 generation, people got weirdly attached to horde modes. It kind of came out of nowhere. Gears of War was like the biggest one with its horde mode, and then Call of Duty Zombies kind of became this huge thing. People just liked horde modes for some reason. Nowadays, people are gravitating towards that Destiny Strike type thing, the idea of you playing through this player versus enemy situation and then getting a reward at the end. That's kind of the direction that players are going in, to the point that even Halo 5's version of Firefight, Warzone Firefight, it's a very finite thing. You could argue it's more of an objective attack mode than it is a horde mode. You're not actually defending yourself from waves of enemies. You're going out into a map and completing objectives within a time limit. I don't think Spartan Ops was very well designed as a game mode. In fact, I think it was critically just foundationally not okay. There were a lot of problems with it. I think its kind of demise was a thing even a game developer could have seen coming. I expect even 343 understood, ooh, we've got some problems here with the way we designed this mode, but it's too late, it's already cooking in the oven. Destiny Strikes, I think, are a much better implementation of that kind of PvE level design system. The idea of you kind of like going into a hive with a gigantic thing at the end that you need to either acquire or kill. Obviously, I don't think Halo boss battles work very well. I think that's kind of a misunderstanding of how Halo works, but I think that if you took something like that, like player, you need to get into the den of this Covenant thing, deploy a bomb, download Covenant tactical data, and then get out within the time limit. That could be more interesting, because then there's a fail state. Spartan Ops does not have a fail state, and I think that that's a problem. You can die as many times as you want, you'll be fine. You'll respawn in 10 seconds. Players get bored when there is no fail state. And what I think also worked about Spartan Ops, despite its problems, was it was an extension of the campaign, and it gave not just the community, but even YouTubers a lot to talk about. We could theorize, we could find Easter eggs in Spartan Ops. With the release of new episodes, there was even more content after the game was over. In a lot of ways, I think Spartan Ops was kind of ahead of its time for Halo, and I'd love to see 343 take another crack at it. If Spartan Ops was to return, the entire design of the combat loop needs to be reevaluated. You know, you gotta get rid of the no-fail state. You gotta design it very differently, but the idea of Halo's campaign, Part 2, Multiplayer Edition, that's interesting. I like that, and I hope that 343 revisits it. So that is it, guys. This was kind of a longer Q&A because I wanted to, you know, have a lot more fun discussing the questions. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Leave me your questions down below, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Have a good Monday.